right people, and thank you to all of our experts from around the world for being here. We really want to learn from you. We desperately need to innovate in this space, and that means regulatory innovation. So we want to hear your ideas, unprompted, unfiltered. Tell us exactly what you think needs to be done to improve the health of babies and children in the United States and worldwide through the regulatory authorities that we have. And I mean that sincerely. As you know, moms want to see more options for formula. They want to see formula options without seed oils. They want to see formula options without corn syrup. They want to see formula options without added sugar. And some of those are already on the market. And in other spaces, we, as a regulatory body, can help facilitate some of that innovation. There's been almost no change to the monograph for baby formula since 1998, with the exception of adding selenium. Now, in my view, the field of medical science does not stay stagnant for 26 years in any space, and it's hard to believe that is the only sort of enlightened moment that we've had in understanding how best to nourish children. There are people who are concerned about the heavy metal levels in formula. And I think foremost to this entire conversation, we have to acknowledge that we all want the same thing. There are no malicious actors, and we have to see the best in everybody. And this should not be a us versus them with any stakeholder group or any innovator, developer, or company out there. This is an expert forum to ask, how can we think collectively about what's best for some of the most vulnerable in our nation? Gandhi once said that the true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members, our seniors and our children. And so we look forward to your ideas. We are going to take them very seriously. This is not a horse and pony show where you get to say what you think and then we ignore it and say that we had a forum. This is a true listening session. And so we are going to take your ideas and go back to our subject matter experts and the terrific career scientists at the FDA who have been working on this, and our policy staff, and ask, what can we do differently? So with that, I want to say thank you for coming from very far, and some not so far, to share your ideas with us. I'm very excited about this. This is one of the expert panels I was looking forward to most as we were setting this up. So thank you, and I'm really looking forward to this.
Fantastic. And thank you for your leadership in hosting this. All right, very good. So we have a lot to get through and a lot of brilliant minds here to share information with us. So today's panel will pay special focus to innovation, the reduction of heavy metals, seed oils, and added sugars, amongst other topics. So I'm going to go around and do a brief introduction, and as we then pass it over, folks will give a little bit more about their background as they share their perspective on these issues. So I'd like to welcome Stephen Abrams. Maybe give a wave as we go around. There we go. So we know who you are. If for folks who can't see the placard. Tom Brenna, Roger Clemens, Valeria Cohran, Nan Du, Andrea Gilbaugh, Anelise Guild, Thomas Nudson, Sushma Krishna, Tim Sentongo, George Tidmarsh. And we have two individuals participating remotely today. We have Michael Goran, and we have John Allen Kerner, Jr. Fantastic. Okay. I'd like to make a special note that the personal opinions and professional views expressed by panelists during this event do not reflect FDA's official position. Before we get started, I'll cover a few housekeeping items. This panel is being recorded and live streamed for public viewing, so thank you to those who are joining us online and those who will view this recording after the event has concluded. We are live streaming on FDA's YouTube channel and X. Thank you to the crew here and the media team who are making this event possible live. We ask those listening in the room, including any media who are joining us today, to remain in listen mode only. There will be time after the event to engage with the participants and panelists, and we look forward to those follow-up discussions. All right, now I'll turn it over to our panel of 13 experts who each have 5 minutes to present their views and share their thoughts and commentary with us on infant formula. As I turn it over to each of you, I'll ask that you each state any relevant conflicts of interest for yourself and any organizations you represent, so that that is clear and transparent. All right, first we will hear from Stephen Abrams. Good.
Good morning and thank you. I'll speak for about 5 minutes or so about some innovation concepts that Dr. Macri talked about and how we can get the ideas that come here out and get them into action. I spent many years working in the field of infant nutrition. I am a clinically practicing neonatologist and have had a lot of interest in this field. I've also prepared, as a few others have, a longer presentation that covers these issues that we will find a way to get posted for those who want a little more than 5 minutes about these topics. So to begin, I've been fortunate to participate, and I have no relevant conflict of interest that are currently involved for this discussion. Anything I've done with formula companies has been considerably in the past. There have been 2 recent FDA-supported National Academies panels looking into the insights into the infant formula supply and the regulation of infant formula in the United States. These were in significant part prompted by the formula shortages of 2022. And the NASM panels, and again, I'll go through this in some more detail, but basically focused on the need for greater resilience in our formula supply. We ended up with a situation 3 years ago when families could not find any formula. They resorted to making homemade formula, which was very unsafe. And what was needed is a greater set of regulations. We're very pleased that the FDA, since that panel from NASM reported, has made some recommendations for changes. They have also pointed out regulatory needs they need from Congress, focusing on the ability to identify problems that might occur in formula manufacturing before they get out to the public. And we also know that, and some others here I think will talk about, there's a tremendous need for professional and consumer information about infant formulas. It's a landscape that's difficult for families that go to the formula aisle of a store and they cannot figure out what to possibly get, what it means, and formula claims and things like that need to be fixed. A second panel set up by NASM, which just reported last month, was about how we test and approve infant formulas, or FDA terminology, they register infant formulas in the United States. Currently, there are 2 major aspects to taking a novel formula or a major change in the formula and getting them approved regulatory perspective. The first is an animal study called about protein called a PER study, and the second is a human growth study. Both of these are very time-consuming, they're expensive. The processes for doing these are very old, and the National Academies panels strongly suggested changes in that, removing the specifics of the animal study and creating a much more effective way of evaluating protein, simplifying and clarifying the rules around human growth studies. For example, does every study need a control group? That isn't necessarily the case in some cases, and making it possible so that industry can innovate and get it to the market safely. We're not trying to get rid of testing, but get it to the market safely and much faster than currently exists. So that second NASM report was just released, and I think it will make a really big impact. And I know we've had good response to it from the FDA already, and that's a big thing. I think it's important as we have this discussion that we recognize that the Nutrient Guidance in the Infant Formula Act was created around 1980 for the most part. There are gaps in what's there. Some of them are things that we've talked about, fats and carbohydrates have got a lot of attention. There are some basic things like iron, calcium, phosphorus that have a tremendous need to be updating and harmonize as best possible with European and Codex, which are World Health Organization standards. Our standards for these nutrients in many cases are quite different. And just to give you an example, the iron in infant formula in the United States is much higher than it is allowed to even be in Europe, and the current science supports the European perspective. So it's a chance for us to take a look at every nutrient, not just the seed oils, and say, do we need to set our limits? Where do we need to look at what needs to be done? And can we harmonize so that the world sees formula in one way? And families, as they're trying to say, well, I want to buy a formula that's made in Europe, can understand that the formulas made in the United States meet those same standards for them. And I think we can do that. And finally, I want to make a point about breastfeeding and support of the interplay of breastfeeding and infant formula. This panel and the work here is about formula. It's not about breastfeeding. But a large proportion of mothers and families in the United States mixed feed their babies. They give both formula and breastfeeding. We do virtually no research on that and how that can be done. There are all sorts of things people hear in the media about what formula you have to use if you're supplementing. We need to take a look at that and really look at innovating that. And I think we also need to begin to take a look at how we market formulas so families are not confused that label claims on formulas make it seem like the formula is human milk. Formula is an important product that stands on its own. It tries to mimic as best it can the aspects of human milk, but it is not closer or identical to human milk. So I think there's a lot that can be done, and I think we're all of us really excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you for those comments. Our next expert panelist is Tom Brenna. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, you're on mute. Okay. Well, thanks very much. It's delightful to be here. I'm a professor at the University of Texas at Austin in pediatrics and in chemistry and in human nutrition, and a professor emeritus at Cornell. I speak only for myself. I don't speak for the American Oil Chemists Society or for either one of those institutions or anybody else. I'll leave it at that. But I have another conflict of interest that I didn't, of sorts, that I didn't put on my conflict slide. In the spirit of speaking from the heart, I'll say something about that. That conflict brought me into this field 34 years and 3 months ago, which was a set of very premature twins. Our daughter was the size of a pint of beer, one of our favorite units of measure. And that was at a time when omega-3 research was really in its infancy, pun intended. The twins got breast milk, and mom got DHA, and that was before we knew that DHA went directly into breast milk. We know that now. That previously pint-sized daughter is taking a break from her career as a tissue bag technician, and is raising 2 daughters of her own. And her brother, who was more like 2 pints, is a chemical engineer, so not bad. And that's N equals 2 on DHA, Roger. Okay. So, my role, I think, on this committee is that I'm the fat guy. So I'm the person who has some connection to the story of seed oils, and the first thing I'll start and end with one general thought: omega-6 for body, omega-3 for brain. So it really is a pleasure to be back at the FDA again. I've been here quite a few times. After spending the 1990s in basic research on DHA and infant nutrition, I found myself speaking to the infant formula team in 2001 at a room in the shadow of the Capitol over on the Mall, and there I was telling them that it was overdue, which it was, to permit DHA to be put into formula. And soon after, the FDA issued its no questions letter, which permitted DHA to be put into, as it turns out, term formula for the first time. Preterm formula actually was a bit later and is another story. So I guess on that basis, I can't say that the FDA has never listened to me. It has a little bit, and so that was really terrific. Now, I've served on actually quite a few ad hoc, let's say, panels and formal panels for the government and elsewhere over the years that have considered what fat should be. in formulas, and we pretty much stick to the fats. The slide that I have up right here comes from a recent one in 2021, and the reason I put this up here is first to point out that most of the fatty acids in formula, which about half of the calories in formula are from, and breast milk actually, are from fat. And over 85% of that is from saturated and monounsaturated fat. So we've heard of those things. But whenever we talk about these things, we consider 4 fatty acids specifically, and I put them on here on this slide. They consist of two omega-6s and 2 omega-3s. The omega 6 linoleic acid and alpha linoleic acid are the plant ones. DHA and arachidonic acid are the more thought of as the animal ones. And what you see on the slide, which I can hardly see from here, but what is on the slide is recommendations from around the world, including the EU and China, as well as the United States. And we only have one recommendation for one single fatty acid, and that's a minimum that was put in 81 in the original Infant Formula Act, and not a lot has been done since then. Actually, nothing's been done since then, so there we go. Let's see, what else do I want to say about that? Everyone else has been updating their requirements, and we have not. We really should get onto it. A 1998 panel, considering infant formula, it's already been referred to here, recommended that these fatty acid requirements be revisited in 5 years. That was 1998, so we are 27 years. Yep, on and still looking to do that. Okay, so what else do I want to say? Hit it so that I get my animation. There we go. So I have one. They told us we only get one slide, so I cheated and put a second one on top. So this is a study. It wasn't mine, but it's from 1984. There was a series of papers that were published where it looked at actual seed oils. So now I get onto the topic of seed oils. Well, seed oils are one sort of oil. There's 2 other kinds of oils, fruit oils and let's say cow's milk fat, and you can maybe think of other ones, but those are the major ones. And the thing I want to, the one point that I want to make scientifically here is that it's not just about some problem with seed oils. It's not all seed oils are the same. So in this study, rhesus monkeys, pregnant rhesus monkeys, were fed formulas that had all of their fat that came from either soybean oil or from safflower oil, both seed oils on the hit parade these days. And so when the infants were born, they were weaned to those essentially formulas where that was the only source of fat. And what they measured was visual acuity. Now, visual acuity in humans or primates or well, pretty much any other mammal is a measure of brain development, not just retinal development. And what you find is that with safflower oil, which is very omega-3 deficient, much slower development of visual acuity, and that's the lower line there. And I don't really have a pointer, but if you get to the end there, there's a red circle, and that corresponds on the eye chart to about a 2100 on our familiar scale, where 20/20 is normal vision. But in soybean oil, which has some omega-3, it's got the plant one, but it has some omega-3, they have a vision at 12 weeks of age of 20/50. So much, much better. And as it turns out, if you give these same animals a source of omega-3s, EPA and DHA, so fish oil, classic fish oil, when they get a little bit older, let's say starting at about a year, the ones on the lower curve don't recover. So you've got to get this right early on. That's another salient point we have to make. Okay, so it's not just about seed oils. It's about what we replace them with. Something like 60 or 70% of the edible oils in the United States are seed oils. And so if we shut it off tomorrow, domestic seed oil, I should say. So there are things we can do to make it better. There's no question about that. And I would be delighted to help you out making it better, or at least thinking that through how we do that, and keep all oils, all foods affordable for everyone. Big thing. We tend to think about what we can afford around the table, but what's really important is not getting the price a little bit higher, which then knocks a few people off the ability to really feed themselves the right way. Okay, so I'll end the way I began. Omega-6 for body, omega-3 for brain.
Very good. Yeah, thank you. Go ahead and click your mic off. We'll go to our next presenter. Thank you. As a preventive medicine physician, I love it. Get it right early on. Upstream. Very good. All right. Our next presenter and expert panelist is Dr. Clemens. Go ahead.
Good morning, everybody, and I hope you're having a good day. This is a very important topic. Thank you for the opportunity to serve the American public, particularly infants, and thank you, Mr. Commissioner, for your kindness for allowing us to be here today. Safety. I'm also, the title of my presentation is basically Infant Formula, Safety by Design. So I'm the guru talking about safety of the product. I'm associated with the USC School of Pharmacy, where I teach classes to future pharmacists and future physicians. I'm also associated with the MSU College of Law, where I teach science to lawyers. Safety is critical in all that we do, regardless of population group. So if you look, I just finished a chapter in a book about safety and U.S. regulations. And paramount is that if you look at the spectrum of regulations since 1906, I know I was there. There we go, there is some humor. But if you look at the spectrum of regulations, every regulation we see on the books through the FDA has been reactive instead of proactive, with the exception of one, and that was under President Obama. So we had the Food Safety Modernization Act of 2011. Everything else has been reactive. Even the Infant Formula Act of 1980, I know Fred Degnan. He was the general counsel of the agency then. And Fred has since retired, as you well know. He was with King and Spalding after leaving the agency. So he set the standard for what it should look like. Things will look like differently today, as indicated by Dr. Abrams, by Dr. Brenna. So we must be anticipatory when we look for the safety for future foods. The other comment also by Dr. Abrams, that we look at a very vulnerable population, infants. I started my work in pediatric nutrition in the Republic of Korea. I served in Korea, just south of DMZ, many years ago, 60 plus years ago, and I saw kids firsthand. And I saw what the devastation will do for malnutrition will do. And I've worked on every continent around the world working with kids, and most issues that I confront is actually diarrheal disease. So we have to look at this very vulnerable population and take it seriously. This is also a serious period of development, as indicated by Dr. Brenna. What are the short-term and long-term health consequences of what we feed the children today? And we need to examine the implications. Dr. Brenna made a comment about long-chain fatty acids. What are the implications for future? I actually teach classes on brain development, and from consumption to about 30 years of age, all those changes that occur. We need to understand those dynamics, and we're not there yet today. Interestingly, here in the United States, we have a definition of safety. I often challenge my students that we should change the definition of safety, Dr. Commissioner. Right now, the definition is preponderance of evidence, reasonable certainty of no harm, and under the conditions of use. It's markedly different than other countries of the world. Reasonable certainty, preponderance of evidence. What do those terms mean to you? Take it seriously. So preponderance, 51%, 48%, 60%, what number would you like? And reasonable certainty, what does that mean to you as a parent, or grandparents, as a human? Mm-hmm. And under conditions of use, and conditions of use is everything. And here we have a PO, that means fed by mouth. So we want to have some safety for the future, not only today, but for the future. And safety analysis is more than just chemistry. Chemistry analysis is also biological. We need to understand the dynamics, what happens in the human body at different age and stage groups. Dr. Abrams mentioned we're seniors. I'm almost 80. I could talk to that. And then the very young. We need to have that better understanding of those dynamics. I actually co-chaired the very first geriatric meeting 40 years ago, looking for the future. We need to be looking for the future today. So we thank you for that opportunity. A recent report came out about heavy metals. Because I've served on so many GRAS panels here in the United States, over 130, heavy metals is always a concern. And we often will see, well, does the USDA, or excuse me, does the FDA have standards for the various ingredients? And the answer is no. So we need to have consistency, understanding what the maximum level should be or could be. When we don't have standards in the United States, we go to Codex, and they often provide us some guidance what the maximum level should be. So again, it's not established in the United States, but there are other parts of the world that actually have standards for these heavy metals. Arsenic, lead, cadmium, and mercury are the big top four. And safety is more than microbiology. And microbiology, and over since 20 years ago, I got called in on this. I'd already retired. I actually retired 26 years ago. But they keep on saying you need to work some more. So here we are. At that time, it was E. sakazakii, is now Coronabacter sakazakii. I have an undergraduate degree in microbiology, so I can say the words. But next step, what are the emerging pathogens for the future? Are we talking about viruses? Are we talking about fungi? Mycotoxins? What should we be looking at for the future? And I think we could spend some time with that. We also look at these natural occurring toxins in the food supply, mycotoxins, endotoxins. These are natural, so they must be safe, right? Well, we know differently. But yet the maximum levels for these compounds have not been established either by the United States government or by Codex. And big one, we have it in peanuts, but we don't feed peanuts to kids, certainly at this age. And here we're talking about levels of 15 parts per billion, not parts per million, but parts per billion. So we're looking at real lower levels where that might be considered tolerable without any adverse events. But when we look at adverse events, are we looking at overt presentations, or are we looking at molecular changes that occur down the DNA level and cellular level? The two more points I want to address today. Allergenicity. The early days, we would actually feed the babies. We do oral open challenges, and many of my colleagues here on the panel do those kinds of studies. But you see the notes, and you can read the notes that I have here. Now there are tools to be looking at in terms of various proteins and their homologies and homogeneity relative. Well, there's a likelihood that that protein could have an allergic response. And those criteria were set up by my friends at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. There's a great database, probably the largest database in the United States. And the other ones, of course, at the University of Texas, they have plus Codex guidelines on allergenicity. When kids light up, it's serious, and that should not be happening. And I did some work in that space decades ago. Finally, my last note here is to say we need to readdress safety standards for all foods, including, in particular, infant formula. What should it look like? What should be the future quality specifications? I'm chair of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics for the American Quality Council. And I see this every single day. Where are we going with this? And are we studying not only the ingredients, but are we studying the finished product? Infant formula now requires to look at the finished product, but what happens to all the ingredients in between? Are they all GRAS? Are they all been through a rigorous evaluation for safety? And we have to know for what we've done in the past, sections 182, 184, and 186 of 21 CFR. What would that look like for the future? I teach law, so I can say that. We want to be innovative, and this team will talk about some innovation in the future. Bottom line, innovation for the future, we hope that will lead to improved health outcomes for the future for our kids. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you so much for those comments. All right, we'll move along. And I'll remind folks to disclose any relevant conflicts of interest right as they begin. Our next expert panelist is Valeria Cohran. Go ahead, please.
Thank you again for this opportunity to speak on this panel. My disclosures are listed above, serving on the Speakers Bureau. My expertise as a pediatric gastroenterologist is taking care of patients who have what's called intestinal failure. So they have had surgical resections of their intestine, and they are left with less intestine. So as you can imagine, if you don't have all of your intestine, you have difficulty absorbing. So our treatments for these patients include IV nutrition, so nutrition that's provided through veins, and that also has its own complications. And so as a result, some of these patients go on to transplantation. When we think about patients who have intestinal failure, these are premature infants, as Dr. Brenna mentioned earlier, patients who may develop conditions such as necrotizing enterocolitis. We do know that human breast milk has shown some advantage with a variety of different conditions, otitis media, necrotizing enterocolitis. We know that it enhances neurodevelopment. Unfortunately, what we also know is that everyone does not have access to breast milk. Everyone cannot breastfeed for a variety of different reasons, whether it's medical reasons, whether it's socioeconomic reasons. So when we're using or mixing feedings, as Dr. Abrams mentioned earlier, we need to have our formulas to be as similar as what we can to breast milk, because that is the gold standard. That is how we assess the children when they come to clinic. Look using the WHO growth chart. So looking at what's in breast milk is really important for this. When we think about what happened a few years ago, I can actually remember where I was when the formula shortage hit. It was a Friday afternoon, and I started getting the phone calls from the fellows, from the dietitians, from the nurses that the children don't have formula. And as a result, some of these kids, we were able to switch to different formulas. Some of these kids had to be actually hospitalized because we didn't have access to some of these very needed formulas. So I think trying to avoid that from happening is so important. And it was such a stressful time for such a long period for so many families. When we think about breast milk, it has so many different components in it, and I'm not going to be able to go through all of them, but some of the components that are important, for instance, in my patient population, human milk oligosaccharides, for instance, and they've been shown to be beneficial in preventing infections, urinary tract infections. There are a variety of different other bioactive agents, such as glucagon-like peptide 2, and they have been shown to be beneficial. So I think as we're trying to think about what the future looks like in infant nutrition, continuing to use breast milk as that standard, continuing to recognize for some of these patients, when you think about it, nutrition, they're taking a bottle, they're gaining weight, but some of it actually are from medical conditions that these kids are undergoing. We're picking certain formulas based off of the fat content, for instance, based off of the protein content, for instance. So I do think that we have to consider all of these things for these patients. We have kids who have allergies who cannot take intact milk proteins. So when we think about infant nutrition, trying to maximize it, trying to make sure that our patients are receiving the content, what they need, whether it's the type of fat to enhance their growth and their neurodevelopment. So I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for sharing those perspectives. All right, our next expert panelist is Nandu. Go ahead.
Thank you again for this opportunity to chat with you guys. I have no disclosures. I just wanted to start. I'm a pediatric gastroenterologist, and so I thought I'd first tell you a little bit about my clinical background. It's that I help manage pediatric growth and nutritional challenges such as malabsorption, GI food intolerances, and nutrition deficiencies. And part of that management is being able to utilize formulas. Specifically, there's specialized formulas that are used for the management and treatment of many of these pediatric GI diseases and disorders, such as Dr. Cohran had just mentioned, and including infants, and they should be covered as well as we discuss kind of cost and coverage and access. That's another thing that I think is important to consider as we reevaluate these guidelines for formulas. The other thing that I wanted to add is then from a research standpoint, I've really been interested in looking at labeling, nutrient content, and safety of infant and toddler formulas, specifically in looking at the differences between the United States and the rest of the world. We've talked briefly about some other international guidelines put out by Codex, but also just some of our neighbors in Europe, in Australia, and even in Canada have already slightly different guidelines on components of our infant formulas. And we should be thinking kind of thoughtfully how we can kind of be more consistent with our kind of international partners. And I think that will also help kind of bring some clarity and transparency to the families. Because as a clinician, oftentimes families will come to me and say, I've tried 6 different formulas and I don't think any of them have worked. But then when we look at it a little bit more closely, I'm not sure exactly they're really that different, if that makes sense. And so a lot of it, and I think my colleagues will talk more, is about labeling and what is allowed to be put on the formula labels should, I think, be evaluated and kind of discussed more. So I really feel like this is an excellent opportunity to kind of reassess the bioactive ingredients as well as other components, whether they're necessary in infant formulas, and also incorporating kind of some of the recent advancements that we have in the scientific research world. So thank you again for the opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Our next expert panelist is Andrea Gilbaugh. Go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm on the panel as a practicing pediatric dietitian, so I have expertise in formula use and knowledge of many different types of formulas. From my perspective, misinformation about infant formula is widespread, and many pediatric dietitians have been tasked with addressing unsafe feeding practices, often on an individual level. Parents and caregivers need reassurance that infant formula in the United States is safe. Another problem is that marketing by formula companies is confusing. The many names for similar products, and when a major formula company has these terms on the labels that are confusing. Infant formula labeling should also not undermine breastfeeding or the use of breast milk. Another concern is the possibility of another shortage for both the impact on families as well as the time and resources that would be required for healthcare providers to navigate another severe shortage. It was truly a horrible experience, a lot of stress, and as we already mentioned before, hospitalizations. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much. All right, we'll move to this side, and we will continue with our next expert panelist, Anelise Guild. Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. I have no disclosures, so I'll start there. My name is Anelise Guild, and I'm honored to serve on this board as a parent advocate and a consumer of infant formula. I'm not a scientist or a nutritionist, but I bring the voice of families, real people who rely on these products to nourish and care for their children. As a parent of 2 children with medical and dietary needs, I've experienced firsthand how critical it is to have access to safe, effective, and clearly labeled infant formula. There were times I felt overwhelmed by the options, unsure of what would truly support my child's health. That experience drives my passion for this work. I'm here not only to represent parents and caregivers, but also to be a voice for our tiniest, most fragile consumers, our infants. They rely on all of us, industry leaders, regulators, and advocates to provide healthy, nutritious, and safe formulas that support their growth today and shape their health for the rest of their lives. My goal is to make sure that the real-life experiences of families are reflected in the policies we shape when we include consumer voices alongside scientific and industry perspectives. We make smarter, more compassionate decisions that better serve all families, especially those with the most complex needs. I believe that when we bring together the perspective of science, policy, and lived experience, we create better outcomes. I see my role on this board as a bridge between the people who make these products and the people who depend on them. I'm here to ask questions, push for transparency, and advocate for policies that prioritize safety, clarity, and equity. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this amazing work.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, we'll move down here to our next expert panelist, Thomas Nudson. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for inviting me to join this panel. I was actually kind of surprised to be invited because I don't work in the infant formula area. I am, over the past 50 years, I've been working on birth defects research. I've spent the first half of my career working on mouse models as a developmental toxicologist, and at some point said, well, I'm making the world a better place for mice. What are we doing for children? So I was actually recruited to the U.S. EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, as part of their founding computational toxicology program, in which case we've built approaches where we can begin to gather huge amounts of information using in vitro, which is in a dish, and in silico, which is in a computer, models of development. I retired from the EPA last year. My opinions that I'm expressing here are my own, not those of the agency, but I have been working now at Indiana University in the Department of Intelligent Systems Engineering as a gratis adjunct appointment to continue some of the work that we began. And I'm also, my disclosure is that I'm founding editor of a journal by Elsevier called The Current Research in Toxicology. So I think the reason that I was invited to serve on this committee is to bring some of the newer scientific approaches that can be used for evaluating chemical effects, nutritional effects on developmental processes. Development is really the outcome of three different things. So your individual genetics, the environment that you're exposed to either in utero or as a neonate, and social economic factors. And I think the infant formula touches on all of those, but particularly as an important social economic consideration. The term New Approach Methods, or NAMs, is a way of looking for translational value with animal-free methods for basic research, discovery, and improvements in risk science. You'll hear the term NAMs used in many contexts, New Approach Methods, non-animal models, novel alternative models, but you can trace back some of the history of this to two monographs, one from the FDA on predictive toxicology and one from the EPA on prioritization work plan. So the websites are listed there. And a program, Toxicology in the 21st Century, Tox 21. This was a collaboration among several federal institutes, including the NIH, the EPA, and the FDA, to begin using high throughput, robotic approaches that can be used to screen chemicals for the potential to disrupt cellular processes underlying adverse health effects. Up to the right, I've sort of summarized some of the ways that this is done to inform developmental and reproductive toxicology, or DART. So just starting from 12 o'clock, working around high throughput screening approaches. In the Tox 21 program, there's been thousands of in vitro assays using most often human cells, looking at tens of thousands of chemicals, and building a big database in how chemicals interact with different biological processes and making that information public. This can be put into high throughput kinetic models where we can translate that information from a dish into an in vivo system, including humans and including different life stages. Use of computational chemistry through structure-activity relationships gives us information on what we know about chemical structures and how they can influence biological processes. Microphysiological systems, or MPS models, organotypic culture systems that use human cells to build complex models of tissues that actually start behaving physiologically like the tissues in vivo. And we can begin to test chemicals and drugs and nutrients for effects on those different types of systems. AOPs, or adverse outcome pathways. These are pathways of regulatory value to the EPA, to the FDA, to any risk science, where we couple all the information we know about how one particular molecule is important in a process and how it could be disrupted to lead downstream to particular phenotypes. My interest being birth defects. And finally, ABMs, or agent-based models. This is a big passion of mine, using the computer to build smart models that are essentially intelligent systems, and they behave as biological cells because we can incorporate that information into computer code and let the cells in silico behave as they would in a real embryo or baby. And so all of this is important to put together with our existing information and knowledge base. We know a whole lot about embryonic development, a whole lot. There's still a lot that needs to be learned, a lot of research that needs to be done, but we can use all that information, use new approaches in high throughput literature mining and organization, and begin to translate that into vital information that can be used for improved healthcare strategies. And that's going to be particularly important, I think, for this effort. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity to work with this prestigious panel. Sarah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, our next expert panelist is Sushma Krishna. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, and thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this panel discussion today. My name is Dr. Sushma Krishna, and I'm a neonatologist practicing in New York City. I specialize in caring for critically ill babies after they're born in the neonatal intensive care unit. Most of these babies that I follow are born premature. I also follow these babies after discharge in our high-risk NICU development clinic. So much of what I do every day is optimizing nutrition for these babies because we know that good growth means good health outcomes and improved neurodevelopmental and cognitive outcomes. We also know that from decades of research that breast milk is the best milk for these vulnerable babies, and it reduces the risk of serious, potentially life-threatening complications, such as necrotizing enterocolitis that was discussed prior today. Although this panel today is about formula, I do believe that part of the discussion should also include improving support for breastfeeding moms in the form of access to breast pumps, lactation consultants, and increasing access to donor milk to all NICUs in the United States, not just the ones that can afford to buy them for their patients. Although breast milk is the best choice for these babies, it doesn't always provide enough nutrients on its own to support adequate growth of many of these extremely small babies. And so we often have to add highly concentrated forms of formula to breast milk to boost its calories and nutrients to support their growth. So obviously this is an area of particular interest for myself and my colleagues as we want to provide formula fortification that's derived from the best ingredients and that is safe and effective. I also have a particular interest in using probiotics as another type of additive to promote the development of a healthy gut microbiome in these babies, which has also been shown to reduce gut inflammation and serious infections. I ran a quality improvement initiative at my institution where we implemented routine use of probiotics in our NICU and saw a significant reduction in these infections. Unfortunately, we had to pause this initiative due to some regulatory policies from the FDA. And so I hope that as part of this discussion, we'll be looking into that as well. As these babies get older before discharge and they're transitioning home, and when I see them outpatient in our follow-up clinic, many of them are transitioning to formula or sometimes mixed feeding with breast milk and formula. And I've definitely noticed that in the last couple of years since the formula shortage, that many of these parents are asking questions about ingredients, the quality of the ingredients, impacts on the long-term outcomes on growth and development, comparing American formulas to the ingredients that are in European formulas. All parents want to give their children the best possible nutrition, as do we as providers. And that's why I think today's discussion is so important, and I'm so happy to be part of this and excited to move forward. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much. All right, our next expert panelist is Tim Sentongo. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brenna, Dr. Macari, and the opportunity to participate in this committee. My name is Timothy Sentongo. I am a pediatric gastroenterologist. I'm a professor at the University of Chicago, and my expertise is in growth assessment, nutrition assessment, malabsorption, nutrient deficiencies. So my role is really at the confluence of all these nutrients with the human body. So really, I want to see that these nutrients are actually translating into normal and healthy growth. And a lot has really happened since the Code of Federal Regulations that were published in 1998, and now a lot has transpired since then. In 1998, they set out the guidelines what an infant formula should be like. However, about 8 years later, we had our first infant growth charts, which are based on infants who are exclusively breastfed. And we discovered that breastfed infants grow differently from formula-fed infants. Formula-fed infants grow much faster than breastfed infants. However, if you look at the long-term outcomes, maybe this faster growth is also programming them for some of the other issues we see much later on in their later childhood and adolescence, and obviously adulthood. And that's the concern about overweight. Some of the guidelines at that time were the best they were at that time of the information that was available. One of the dominant ones is, for example, the protein requirements that were presented are much higher than what's in breast milk. So the margin of protein that can be put into an infant formula at that time, at that publication, is higher than what we know is necessary right now. So that's an opportunity for us to review the guidelines of what is an ideal formula. I know there always have to be many alternatives to formula because, as my colleagues have stated, not every parent can breastfeed their infant, but those who are unable to breastfeed their infant should basically be guided. There should be guidelines into a formula that's as close as possible to breast milk. So again, the other things I do, again, are all the different micronutrients and how they translate into growth in both healthy children. We all want our children to be healthy, but some children fall sick, and some sickness is present at birth and some is acquired later on, and they do need a formula. Therefore, my role is to make sure that there are options that match those situations, and that the growth can be as normal as possible, so that your sickness is not a sentence that you never grow and get your full potential. So I really thank the FDA and my colleagues for giving me the opportunity to participate on this committee, and I'm looking forward. Thank you very much.
Excellent, thank you. All right, our next expert panelist is George Tidmarsh. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And I want to thank Secretary Kennedy and Commissioner McCary for convening this panel. I think it's long overdue, as you know. And I want to thank you, Dr. Brenner, for hosting us and your expertise. There's nothing better than preventative medicine, and I think FDA and our society are benefiting tremendously from your expertise in that area, so thank you. My training is in pediatrics and neonatology, so I've taken care of many of these vulnerable infants, but I would say most of my career has been devoted to large-scale clinical trials in the biotechnology industry. And while I have an opinion that seed oils are not really evolutionarily natural and we should have options, and I also believe we should focus on some of the tag-along contaminants such as heavy metals, what I think I can most provide to this panel is some thoughts on innovation. I think what we need is we need to stimulate innovation in this area. And my experience here is through new drug development, where there are certain not only legislative aspects, but legislative initiatives, but also regulatory initiatives that can stimulate the private sector to innovate here. And if you look at a comparable idea in new drug development, the FDA provides 5 years of exclusivity to new compounds that come on the market. And what that does is it stimulates risk capital to come in, because if you're risking money, you need a reward. And oftentimes that reward is reaped by a period of exclusivity. So perhaps we can look at something similar here, where innovators can be granted some period of exclusivity that gives them a reward, and therefore capital will flow in and innovate. So I think that my suggestions here need to be developed further, but I think that the FDA has the power to stimulate innovation through some of these ideas. So again, thank you very much. And I guess last, I have no disclosures of conflicts of interest. And I also just finally want to recognize my friend and mentor who will speak next, Dr. John Kerner. who really has organized this panel, knows everybody here, and is a tremendous advocate for children's health and nutrition. So thank you, John.
Very good. All right, we're stealing your thunder, Dr. Kerner. No, I'm just kidding. I see you are with us, so we'll go to you next. Our next expert panelist, as mentioned, is John Allen Kerner Jr. Go ahead, please.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to do this. I was quite honored by Dr. Tidmarsh to invite me to be the co-chair of this FDA expert panel. And I want to give you some background. I have one particular thing that I don't think has been addressed directly so far. I just wanted to give you a little background from my one slide of my background of why I can probably serve well in this world and how I know so many people across the country. One of the most important innovations for us at Stanford is we ran a nutrition course at Packard Children's Hospital, maternal and child health in high-risk obstetrical patients and high-risk infants. We had maternal and child health training grant for like 8 years. Again, this is a federal recommendation, and we basically had frequent conferences that brought in experts from around the country. And then on my own, after Dr. Sunshine left to go to LA Children's, I set up a Advances in Perinatal and Pediatric Nutrition course from 1989 through 2012. And basically, I was about 16, or at least 14 years of that, where we literally were able to bring, because I had some support from industry, to bring people from not just the US, but from Sweden and from a number of the other countries, and particularly France and England, to have international people speak on true experts in infant nutrition. And again, this topic was advances in perinatal and pediatric nutrition. And then this was such a successful conference that they helped, or I should say, I helped Johns Hopkins put together a sister conference because they wanted something similar to ours on the East Coast. So I helped Dr. Saavedra and his team put together this, and actually that conference is still running, and we basically alternated years with them. One of the key things that we did at this conference, other than bring all these experts, is every time we put together, the ones at Stanford, a pediatric formula guide, and it was updated at each of these sessions, and then actually even more recently, and initially was with Joanne Hatner, and then more recently with Andrea Gilbaugh, which is one of the many reasons that she's on this panel. And this broke down every infant and pediatric formula that existed. We contacted all the companies, we got all the updated information and shared that with our colleagues. And I know a number of people around the country look forward to getting that because it's still the most updated thing. And we've updated in 2013 or 2023, thanks to Andrea. I think also my expertise is helpful because I was able to get, I was a PI on a NIH Nutrition Academic Award from 2000 to actually should say 2005, an integrated web-based nutrition curriculum for Stanford. And literally, Stanford did not have any formal nutrition course because there was no space in the curriculum for it and not that many experts. And I put together a web-based course that not only worked for Stanford, but worked for a number of universities around the country and for many years. And it literally was the nutrition from birth through old age. It was all different areas. And I was able to partner with my colleagues in pediatrics and adult and with nutritionists in pediatric and adult to make that so successful. And then, amongst other things, I was the director of the nutrition support team at the Packard Children's Hospital for several decades. And we literally met on a weekly basis with a nutritionist, pharmacist, and actually the nutritionist from around the hospital, and dealt with not just IV nutrition issues, but any complex nutrition issues for patients around the hospital. And I was available to the nutritionists like 24/7, especially the hemonc. People seemed to call me a lot because they had a lot of questions. And that was highly successful, and it showed us the depth of the different nutrition needs for the different patients across the whole place. And anyway, I feel honored to have been invited, and Dr. Brenner, thanks for inviting me, and I look forward to this opportunity to help however I can.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. This nutrition course, now, that wasn't rolled out when I was in medical school either, so excellent work on that.
Yeah, I just have one other thing. It's just, sorry.
Go ahead.
So there, this team that I put together with help from a bunch of other people is pretty amazing. And I think Dr. Abrams put together, the advertising has been a big issue. And one of the issues is there is actually a toddler formula that has no seed oils. And that is true. But it's interesting because it's a toddler formula, and the toddler formulas are not regulated the same way that infant formulas are. And so it brings up a whole different question, and actually how they're handled in Europe is different than how they're handled here. And it was my last point. It just shows how complicated this is.
Very good last comments there. Very good. All right. Do we also have Michael Goran? Was he able to join us virtually today? Is our team?
Yes, I'm
Yes,
here.
we're flipping over. Fantastic. I can only see one face at a time. So very good. You're with us. All right. So you are our last expert panelist before we break into the discussion. Go ahead, Michael Goran.
Yes, thank you, Sarah, and thank you to the commissioner. Sorry I cannot be with you in person today, but I'm thrilled to be part of this important working group. And what I wanted to talk about today with you was related to the carbohydrate content, something that you mentioned, that was mentioned right at the beginning by the commissioner, the carbohydrate and added sugar content of infant formula. That's what I'll be talking about. I am currently professor of pediatrics at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, and I've conducted NIH-funded research in infant and child nutrition for over 30 years, where we focused on trying to understand the early nutritional factors that lead to short-term and long-term chronic disease outcomes, as well as mental health and brain health outcomes. And the issue here is really revolving around the fact that lactose, which is a disaccharide, meaning there's two small sugars joined together, those two small sugars are glucose and galactose. Lactose is the sole carbohydrate energy source in breast milk. But the FDA regulates these older regulations that we're talking about. They only regulate the amount of carbohydrate, not the type of carbohydrate. So during the last 20 or 30 years, there's been all kinds of different types of carbohydrates introduced into infant formula. And in fact, now, today, the majority of infant formula sold in the US is made with non-lactose sugars, such as sucrose, which is ordinary table sugar. But most of the non-lactose formulas are, in fact, made with corn syrup solids, which is a glucose polymer, meaning it's a big molecule of glucose sugars joined together in one big polymer. So there's no galactose there. So it's a very different type of sugar. It's handled quite differently in the body. And this, I think, has occurred through a series of concerning situations, mostly due to misunderstanding by the public, as well as advertising and marketing claims based on the concept of lactose intolerance in babies. So these are often sold as gentle formulas or marketed towards fussy babies. But actually, the fact is that almost all full-term babies can digest lactose, which is the only carbohydrate energy source in breast milk. Now, in addition, emerging research just quite recently, probably in the last 5 or 10 years, is beginning to show that these non-lactose carbohydrates in formula are linked to a number of different outcomes, including alteration of the infant microbiome, which is the colonization of microbes in the gut, changes in taste and food preference, because these glucose polymers from corn syrup are much sweeter than lactose. And also a study that we published a couple of years ago in collaboration with WIC, so it was a very large population, showing an increased risk of obesity in children who were fed formula made with corn syrup versus traditional formula made with lactose. And that risk of obesity was seen at a very early age, between 2 and 4 years of age. And somebody at the very beginning mentioned vulnerable populations. So this is an increased risk during a very vulnerable time period in a very vulnerable population, since most of WIC participants are lower income, where we see the highest risk of obesity. And then in addition to that, these are ongoing studies, not yet published, but there's also concern that these corn syrup-based sugars, which are glucose polymers with a higher glycemic index, meaning they liberate glucose very quickly and will lead to unstable blood glucose levels. It's not been studied or published. We're doing a study currently, and we had preliminary data showing that, in fact, happens to babies at 6 months of age, have very unstable blood glucose levels with rapid hyperglycemic events and rapid crashes of low blood glucose levels. Now, this is all happening at a time when the other countries that have been mentioned, including the EU, does restrict the amount of sucrose and glucose polymers that can be used in infant formula. So we have that. But also to point out that there are some cases in which lactose can be problematic. For example, infants born with galactosemia or with short bowel syndrome, and also premature babies don't yet have the capacity to absorb or digest lactose. So there are some conditions where lactose can be an issue. So we're talking here about possible recommendations to resolve this issue, which would require things like considering the use of non-lactose sugars as an added sugar. So when the FDA introduced the new labeling laws for requiring labeling of added sugars, formula was made exempt from that. So, and it is a little complicated because formula is a processed product, so lactose is added, but lactose is the milk, is the carbohydrate that's in milk. But also, I think there should be consideration, just like the EU is doing, to determine an allowable level of glucose polymers that would be okay to deal with as a and/or a required level of lactose should be determined. It's very hard for consumers to know, other than looking at the ingredient list on the back of the product, where either lactose or milk sugar would be listed as an ingredient, or something like corn syrup would be listed as the ingredient. There's no other labeling law. I think there should be consideration if there is lactose intolerance. I don't know why there was a decision made to go straight to corn syrup to resolve that issue. That's not what adults with lactose intolerance would do. So there could be a consideration to break apart the lactose into the residual sugars of glucose and galactose as probably a healthier issue than using corn syrup. And then just lastly, under the heading of carbohydrates, we also probably should have some consideration for what are called HMOs, which stands for human milk oligosaccharides. These are complex or more complex sugars that are quite unique to breast milk and are used in some formula. There's one compound called 2-FL, 2-fucosyl lactose. It's related to the lactose molecule, but it has other components on it. These are non-digestible prebiotics that have important functional contributions to health and development. So I think that is probably another topic that should be considered. But the main issue here that I think is most relevant is consideration of lactose versus non-lactose corn syrup-based sugars in formula. So thank you again for the time, and I look forward to discussing all of these issues.
Very good. All right, that was a whirlwind. But folks stuck to time. So believe it or not, we are on schedule. Now we move into our delightful and entertaining brawl in the middle. No, I'm just kidding. So we're going to allow you to ask and answer each other's questions, to debate different things that were said. I have a variety of questions by category that have come into FDA already through our request for information. So I can pepper you with those, or you can pepper each other. But before I jump into my list, I'd like to afford an opportunity for anyone to respond to or comment on the different pieces of information and perspectives that were shared by your fellow panelists. So anyone has a burning response or question that they want to jump off on, feel free to go ahead and do that. And if not, I'm going to begin the peppering. I'm just kidding. Anybody?
Actually, this is Raj. I really appreciate a comment about probiotics, prebiotics, and HMOs. That topic deserves more attention. I did that work at Johns Hopkins Little School in Baltimore 35 years ago when we were addressing rotavirus issues. So that topic, and I'm glad it's continued to emerge, if you will. We saw it in neck babies when I was in South Dakota, in Brookings. You know that well. So we really need to understand what's going on in the gut more than just bacteria. So thank you for bringing that up.
I want to point out that the preterm formulas and the hypoallergenic formulas are classified by the FDA as exempt, meaning that they don't necessarily follow the rules of the Infant Formula Act literally, although they're fully evaluated by the FDA. This panel is focused primarily on the non-exempt or the routine formulas, but I do think that down the road, the exempt formulas need to be looked at as well. So some of these issues have come up, including, so for example, HMOs are not permitted in preterm formulas right now. There's the whole probiotic issue about preterm infants that somebody pointed out. So those are important issues, and I think that this panel is kind of focused primarily on the non-exempt formulas, but that doesn't mean that these side topics won't come up that need to be discussed in a future approach.
Yeah. That's a great perspective. You know, when we put out our RFI, we're looking for public comments that goes through September. So if folks have interest in commenting and submitting, you have until the middle of September, September 11, on the nutrient profile of infant formula. And so, you know, we've convened folks here. Several will also comment through that mechanism. But I'm wondering, what are your thoughts for this group on who is the best entity, or who are the best experts or stakeholders who are poised to provide evidence-based recommendations for revisions to nutrient requirements for infant formula? How do we harmonize, and folks brought this up, harmonize with other countries and other bodies of regulators around the world who have updated nutritional requirements guidelines for these products more recently than we have? So where do we look for the best evidence, and how do we incorporate and synthesize that from your perspectives?
I'll be bold. A case in point, I appreciate you bringing that up, Dr. Brenna. Right now, in 2020, we had a really good NASEM report on breast milk composition. In 2025, we had an excellent report, again, at NASEM. Dr. Abrams was part of that, on protein quality. We have this illustrious group with over 500 years of experience in pediatrics. That's pretty impressive. I've done the numbers. We also have in place a DRI panel that's put together on protein in infants. Why can't we have harmonization of messages? We have ex officio members, so we have continuity and recommendations, either action by the agency or action by the Congress. We don't have that today.
There are a lot of issues involved in this regulation. So, for example, labeling approaches and legalities are different in Europe than they are in the United States about average versus minimum content. So I think that we can't just take European or EFSA guidelines and just turn them into the U.S., and that's why the FDA is here. But I think the FDA does need to reach out to content experts, people in, I mean, we have people about fat, we have people involved in carbohydrates, we have people involved in minerals, people involved in oligosaccharides. And I think each of those are kind of their own scientific groups, and interacting with established groups, which include groups like the American Society for Nutrition, American Academy of Pediatrics, is helpful. But I think ultimately there are topic experts that are going to need to be reached out to. I think there's a lot to be gained from trying to harmonize as much as possible with European guidelines. I think that would be tremendously valuable for everyone. But there are differences in how we regulate formulas and how we label them, and that need to be addressed in doing that.
Other thoughts? Okay, now I'm going to dig a little deeper, okay, on nutrients. So the versus those that might be introduced that are used elsewhere or that might be novel, that might be innovative. So I'm interested in your thoughts a little bit deeper, another layer down on those categories of nutrient ingredients, and how do we move from this dialogue, right, to gathering the evidence necessary to evaluate and make recommendations for newer ingredients or ingredients that would replace in those categories.
All right, I don't mind. Dr. Abrams brought up the point of protein. I appreciate your comments, Steve, very much. Right now, the U.S. law requires PDCAS for every product in the U.S. market except infant formula. 2 years ago, myself and 2 other colleagues submitted a request from the agency, what should we do with PER? They did nothing with it. And we advocated another approach. You're right, Steve, about PERs. I've done hundreds of those, and those days are gone. And the analytical chemistry has changed, and we don't embrace analytical chemistry as well as we could. Then we look at PDCAS, and to the comment about allergenicity and hydrolysates of what we see in many infant formulas in the United States, PDCAS doesn't work, PERs don't work. So then we have DIAS, which has been discussed at the ASM meeting just a few days ago in Orlando, Florida. We need to look at analytical chemistry and methods of how we look at assessment of that might be beneficial for kids for the future.
I think we need to really engage the companies that make these products in this. So let me give you an example. A lot of people are interested in organic formulas for their own choice, but organic lactose in the United States is very much in short supply. So there's been a huge shortage of organic labeled, U.S. labeled formulas because there's not enough organic lactose. So we need to look at everything from, what can the companies provide if we're talking about alternate sources? Do we need the lactose for organic formula to be organic lactose? I think we need to engage everyone, including economists. Somebody brought up the issue of WIC. If we add a lot of things to formula that raise the price, that may increase the price of decrease the WIC rebates. So USDA needs to be piece of all that. So it's a lot of different pieces. And I don't think we can forget the companies involved as well as the USDA, for example.
Well, at least from the perspective of fat content, as I alluded to, there's been quite a few panels on this, ad hoc panels, not government panels, and so some of that's in the literature. So keeping track of that might be relevant, not only because there's recommendations, but because there are many of us who think that there's a need for recommendations enough to put our time into it. The second thing is having, as other people here served on the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, recommendations are made for research, and they really are ignored. And that would be a good place to look, because each time we assemble a panel, we say, well, what about this? And, we still don't have the data. So I think being a little bit more alert to the recommendations of experts as to what gaps exist would be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And some of those gaps, to mention Dr. Krishna's comment and Dr. Cohran's excellent comment too, is oligosaccharides. We look at human milk, and they contain upwards of 200 oligosaccharides, which are rather unique, and they have very unique physiological properties. Currently, the infant formula industry, for the most part, has used GOS and FOS, fructooligosaccharides and galactooligosaccharides. They're not found in human milk. It's number one. And secondly, what we haven't done, and the industry hasn't done, I should say, is to pair up, because each one of those oligosaccharides is unique. It's really unique to the pairing with a certain particular bacteria in the gut or the proximal and distal bowel. So we need to start doing that kind of work and value what's out there. There are 4 oligosaccharides that are derived from breast milk or human milk, which are on the U.S. market. They've gone through GRAS panel evaluation in this country, in Japan, and Europe. But we don't see them really coming out here in the United States.
I just want to add, I don't think our goal should be reinventing the wheel. We know that breast milk is the gold standard, and we know what's in breast milk. And I'm not a researcher, I'm a clinician, but I think what's been mentioned is we know there are additives such as corn syrups that are synthetic, that are added for various reasons. I believe some for cost. To me, as a clinician, knowing that that's not found in breast milk and that we could choose a different alternative, to me it seems okay. Let's do it then. Do we need to go through decades of research when we know already that something exists that's natural, that's provides adequate nutrition and is the safest thing?
Yes, I very much appreciate those comments. And, was thinking as you were speaking earlier about, you hit on something I don't hear many people talk about, and that's how can we reduce the reliance on infant formula, right? Go even further upstream. Now my preventive medicine's really showing, right? But in support for new moms, not just in the first 6 weeks after delivery, but in the first year or the first 2 years. So what else can we do to reduce reliance on these products to the greatest extent possible, given what we know about the supremacy of natural human breast milk? Would you like to respond? Or, okay, go ahead.
Yes, I think that's a great point. And as a mother of 2 children, when I had my first child, I thought, okay, I'm going to breastfeed my baby and it's going to be so easy. And it's portrayed in, videos online as being so easy and wonderful and natural. And I really, really struggled with it to the point where my son almost got readmitted to the hospital because he was so dehydrated. And I looked out there for resources and realized there really weren't any. I had to pay a lot of money for a lactation consultant to come, and luckily I had the means to do that. But there are many, many patients that I take care of, especially in New York City, which is a city of diverse socioeconomic backgrounds, where people don't have access to that. They don't have the money to pay for that. On top of that, breast pumps are very costly. They require a lot of equipment that you have to purchase again. I bought all this stuff and didn't even know how to use it. And so how can we improve access for people to maybe have insurance coverage for lactation consultants? There are insurance companies, I think, that do pay for pumps. They're not always of the best quality. And as I mentioned in NICUs, when mothers are not able to provide their own milk, we are lucky enough at my institution to purchase donor milk from donor milk banks. But not every NICU in the country is able to do that. Depends on availability of a donor milk bank close to your institution and whether your institution has the ability to pay for that donor milk. And so unfortunately, NICUs that are in areas of lower socioeconomic class and region might not have access to that. And I think that that is something that the federal government really needs to look into and should support.
Very good. Yeah, we can share some stories later, but I'll tell you, after watching the Animal Planet and every mammal and species on Earth doing it easily while hunting and babies hanging off, you think, oh, this is a breeze. No, not so fast. But all of these, ancillary topics, they're so important, to bring to this whole conversation. I'm going to skip ahead because I can't help myself on health outcomes and longitudinal health outcomes. So, Dr. Sentongo, you talked about longer term health impacts and trying to take a more longitudinal view of perhaps chronic disease prevention and differences between breastfed babies and infant formula fed babies, or those who have some combination, and many have some combination. Where is the body of literature? What research do we believe is currently available or needs to be conducted to further investigate not just acute health outcomes such as growth, head circumference, weight, but a more wholesome evaluation of all of the types of behavioral, cognitive, physical, and developmental health outcomes associated with formula feeding or a combination of formula and breastfeeding beyond just infancy? So we could start with you, or I'd love to hear other comments as well.
No, thank you very much for that opportunity. Well, we do have pretty compelling data that shows that excess protein is a big contributor to rapid weight gain because the infant formulas have the same caloric density. The different components are matched differently. Some fats are blended, some carbohydrates are cornstarch syrup, others are lactose. But the big differences at that time between breast milk and infant formulas, breast milk has about 1.4 grams of protein per 100 calories, whereas standard infant formulas have more than that. And the guidelines gave a range as high as 4.5 grams of protein per 100 calories. So you can just see that excess protein intake clearly has something to do with the programming of how children grow in the first couple of years of life. And if you follow these children, you realize that if you're very big in the first 3 years of your life, you're likely to be bigger, overweight, during your preschool years, during your school age years. And if you enter adolescence as being overweight, that probability of turning that around gets less and less and less. Again, with all the additional environmental things that in our diets and that we choose to make, that programming continues. So clearly the protein data, I think, is compelling enough. I think the Europeans, they have more tighter, they have a narrower range of proteins that they recommend. And that's also one of the reasons I believe why cow's milk, which has a much higher protein content, is really discouraged in infants. Of course, at an older age, it's encouraged, but even in a controlled amount, because you take too much of it, a lot of protein, those kids really get very overweight. So there's a bit of, so the information, I think, if we go by the guidelines that are, by the Code of Regulations, I think it's a great opportunity to visit that code and maybe narrow down that freelance range of protein that is okay. And then many of the other things, again, are the constant education about the standard things in our diet, the sugars, which this committee is touching on. But we do believe that your growth in the first couple of years of life sets you on a trajectory which can either slow down or just fade into, and once it progresses to adolescence, it's a bit harder to turn that around. Yeah.
There were a series of reviews.
Can I add to that a little bit? Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say in 2016 to 2019, there was a series of reviews looking at breastfeeding versus and the consequences for long-term health specific outcomes, asthma, leukemia, all sorts of things. It was a meta-analysis of all the data. It was done by HHS with a variety of scientific advisors, and it's been published. The problem is that you cannot control between a population and randomize babies to being breastfed or formula fed. So this data tends to be epidemiological. Some of the outcomes people are looking at, childhood leukemia, for example, are such rare outcomes that the epidemiology can be challenged. Nonetheless, there are some important conclusions that came out of that, some of which suggesting that we really can't tell for sure how much benefit. Others point to a very clear benefit for human milk, both for maternal health and child health. So I think that type of epidemiological work needs to continue to go forward. And specifically, as we talk about things like changing the carbohydrates, adding human milk oligosaccharides, changing the fat blends, there has to be a program in place that allows us to do research on these long-term outcomes associated with it, recognizing that we're not going to be randomizing, so it's going to be within the realm of epidemiology, as well as using tools, including preclinical trials. Michael?
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar to that. I mean, there is quite a large body of evidence. There's good evidence of dose dependence. The more and longer breastfeeding takes place, the greater the reduction in risk of chronic disease like obesity, for example. But it's not consistent. It's very variable, and like Steve said, that's partly because it's all based on epidemiological evidence as well as just intrinsic difficulties in those studies in really being able to measure accurately exactly what infants have consumed. So you have to actually measure exactly how much breast milk was consumed. Even the composition of the breast milk might be important as well. There's a lot of individual variability as well, which is not easy to address in those larger epidemiological studies. So there is good evidence. I think we probably need better studies. We probably need better design studies that are specifically designed to answer those questions. Obviously, they're long-term studies because you're interested in very long-term outcomes. The evidence exists, but we probably need better quality evidence down the road as well.
Challenging for sure. And real world evidence and real world data investigation analysis is a hot topic here at FDA, not just for this product space, but all products we regulate. Okay, perhaps we'll move to, did anyone have any other comments on evidence-based, long-term health outcomes, looking at, okay. We'll move to innovation, actually. And Dr. Tidmarsh, you brought up the topic of innovation. Commissioner McCary raised this in his opening remarks. I think it's important, maybe we would all agree, maybe some would disagree, that parents and caregivers are looking for information and they're looking for different options in what they're feeding their babies and children. What do you think could we do as a federal government to help spur innovation in this product space and do it in a way that will help FDA capture and evaluate the necessary evidence that we need both for safety and nutrition in the immediate term, but also in the longer term? How do we help?
Well, innovation, sometimes can be a double-edged sword. It can clearly advance science. If done improperly, it can harm. So I think it's a sensitive topic to make sure that we get right. There are some precursor or models here that we can look to. One of which I mentioned, which is that the FDA can grant exclusivity. There's certain regulatory rewards, so to speak, that can be granted to innovator companies, innovator products that then attract risk capital in to make those innovations. So I do think there are regulatory tools that the FDA can use. In addition, as many of the panel members have mentioned, and I know Dr. Abrams is particularly focused on this, is to improve the regulations around what's required to get a new formula on the market, to get it available. So I think that examining how we can shorten that timeline, decrease the cost, while improving the quality should be the focus. And one last quick comment on terms of the cost. I just want to emphasize that while some of the changes in infant formula might at the outset be more expensive, such as using organic lactose instead of corn syrup, the cost benefit measured over time in improving our chronic health problems like obesity, it's a massively important investment to make to prevent those long-term problems. So we need to weigh those short-term costs with the long-term benefits.
Infant formula is the most protected food source in the world, no question about it. It's a sole source food for babies. It has to have everything in it and has to be perfect. So the FDA over decades has created an immense and overwhelming process to make sure that that formula is safe, and it's been extremely effective. But the formula shortages pointed out that there are times when we needed to bring in formulas that did not go through the full FDA process, many of which had safely been used overseas for many, many years with excellent testing done using overseas guidance. So I think there is the opportunity for us to take a look, and that's what the NASM panel did, and say, how do we make sure that we maintain that absolute level of excellence of FDA review of formula, but also add certain types of flexibilities? Do we really need 6 visits? Do we really need, for the growth studies, we really need to not enroll anyone who's not only on formula by 2 weeks of age? All sorts of very strict kind of rules that may be flexible as we bring upon new sources of protein, different types of energy, and those sorts of things. And that's what the FDA, I think, can really take a look at with the scientific world and take a look at what the European experience has been.
I did want to make one point in that there are many different formulas already available for the families in the United States. And I think one thing that can be very confusing, as we've highlighted, is that some of them are imported in as they were done through the formula shortage. Some of them have now been allowed to be approved through this kind of shortened process through the FDA. But I think part of that is also making sure there's this educational aspect for not for pediatricians, for PDGI, dietitians, other members in the community, as well as I think having a database that's updated saying which formulas have gone through the FDA, because many third-party vendors are importing other formulas, and there's many things that are missed from a regulatory standpoint there. So in the question of innovation, I think also looking at the work that the FDA already does and highlighting that kind of from a transparency standpoint for families and providing the education for providers is also, I think, a vital component to this as well.
Yeah, from the innovation standpoint, I guess my question, being naive to this field, would be why don't we have a computer model that can help us predict the best combination of constituents?
Are you volunteering? You thought you had escaped a regulatory agency, but here you are. Any comments on that?
If we look at the last 30 years of, quote, innovation, I put parenthetical with that, the focus has been on three major areas, neural, gut, and immune function. And my mind says it's much more than that. And part of that process, I think, has been raised by a number of our panel members, is that the review process needs to be thorough, safe, and also is it going to work in that matrix?